Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about 5 tips to finding cheap flights.
So in working as a travel agent 5 days a week, I thought this would be a really good video to do for us today. And I usually come across some really good tips on how to find good flights and how to find cheap flights. So I thought, why not share a few tips today and we can give you guys some information on how to do that.
So the number 1 tip for anyone wanting to book a flight is to book well in advance.
Booking well in advance will give you the best chance of getting a cheaper flight. There's less people that are on those flights that have booked their tickets already, and you'll generally get a good deal. It does come down to availability and supply and demand, which we'll both talk about in just a few minutes. This is especially important for booking on popular dates for travel, such as just before Christmas and popular times throughout the year. But generally, you can book up to around 10 or 11 months in advance for flights. That's kind of the maximum for how far in advance you can book. It's hard to sort of say how long in advance exactly you should book because it does depend on where you're going. And obviously for domestic flights and things within your own country, generally you don't need to book 10 months in advance for those flights. Usually maybe about 6 weeks in advance a lot of the time for those is not too bad. For international flights though, a lot of the time I would recommend at least sort of 4 to 5 months at least in advance for most of those flights, because then you'll hopefully get a good deal on those particular flights, and it's still far enough in advance that a lot of people may still not have bought their tickets.
Our second tip for booking cheap flights is seasonality. So if you're looking at going on flights during school holidays, chances are there are a lot of people doing the exact same thing, or the same as with Christmas. People like to go away for Christmas and school holidays, so picking a season of the year where there's less travelers, you're obviously going to get a cheaper deal because less people will be traveling on those particular dates.
So obviously you've got your high season and your low season for travel, and there's also shoulder seasons, which I like to use a lot of the time when we're traveling, and I like to look for flights on those particular seasons because generally they're sort of a quieter season. They're not a really peak period of time, and obviously low season is good for that too, because if there's not a lot of people traveling, obviously things are going to be a bit cheaper. But I would say with low season and high season, it depends on where you're going. So for example, if you're traveling to the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere and you're looking at going in peak season, that's usually going to be about from anywhere from late May to the end of September, and that will be peak summer time to travel, and that's when the flights are always going to be more expensive. If you were to travel say in April out of the school holidays, or March possibly, or even later in the year around October, November, it's going to be a bit cheaper to travel there. Usually you can avoid those peak seasons if you're willing to be a little bit more flexible with your dates, which is another point we're going to make in just a moment. I do get quite a lot of people wanting to book for the school holidays at my job, and sometimes, especially if they've left it till a few weeks beforehand, they just can't understand why it's more expensive. And school holidays are probably the biggest killer out of everything in terms of making things more expensive. So if you can avoid traveling in the school holidays, I know it's hard sometimes, and I know that's when a lot of people can only get that time off of their annual leave or whatever. If you can avoid it, then it's going to be a lot cheaper for you.
The third tip we have for finding cheap flights is have flexibility with your dates. Even if you do have to travel within school holidays or something like that, that means when you're leaving and when you're coming back as well, a day here or there, or even a week or two, can make a significant difference with the amount of money you're paying.
Even if you can have just one day either side of your dates, if you're really not that flexible, sometimes a day is all it takes to knock a few $100s off your flight. Our fourth tip is understanding availability and booking classes, and this is where it kind of brings all of our other tips under the one umbrella, because it all comes down to understanding what availability means and what the booking classes are on certain flights, and explaining what that actually means and trying to understand them. We'll probably do a more in-depth video about this later on, but essentially booking classes are lettered, and they're not in terms of being economy or business or first class. It's nothing to do with cabin class. Booking classes are something completely different. So essentially booking classes will be like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. And there'll be a certain amount of them per flight. They'll each mean different things. So you might have a group of booking classes that will mean economy seats. You might have a booking class that means business, and another few that mean first class. So they're all always grouped in different ways. Underneath each of those lettered booking classes, there's an amount of seats. And this comes down to the type of fare that you'll be getting, and whether it's going to be a sale fare or if it's going to be a high class fare, which will be more expensive. Once those booking classes start being sold and start being sold out, the cheaper ones start being sold, then you're left with more expensive booking classes. And that's why, in terms of availability, it's important to understand that on certain days or in certain peak times of the year, there's going to be less of those cheaper booking classes because they've already been sold out, unless you book in advance, which is why that was our first tip, because that's a really important one. You're going to be paying for a more expensive fare otherwise. This is why if you walk into a travel agency and ask to get on a flight next week to Bali, you're probably not going to get those cheap $400 flights that you've been seeing advertised. That's probably going to be for a totally different period of time in the future, possibly 6 months in advance. So a lot of people do find it hard to understand that, but it is like anything, it is supply and demand.
So our final tip is to shop around. So look across various different websites, even consider looking at a travel agent. You never know, travel agents can find cheaper deals at times than online.
Don't be too hesitant to go to a travel agency, because although travel agents, yes, they do earn commission, a lot of the time it is built into the fare. So they still are able to get cheaper fares than what is online at times. So just have a look around, see online, go to a travel agent and shop around that way.
So to sum up our 5 tips to finding cheap flights: book well in advance, be flexible with your dates, choose a period that's not a peak season, and really understand availability and supply and demand and how that really works, and also shop around for the best deal. Thank you so much for watching our channel, everyone. We really hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and comment below and subscribe to our channel for future videos.